All right, so once again, welcome everyone to part 2 of Alta's two-part POS annual public data review meeting. A return to previous format where in our first meeting a week ago, March 17th, we reviewed all of the information in the report, presented it in a way that brought to light areas that we thought were of interest to focus on. Today's meeting intended to hear from you. That's the purpose. We want input from the community. As always, this is not your only opportunity to share with us. We do have our POS email that you can submit feedback, comments, questions to at any point throughout the year. In order to have that input incorporated into our annual report to the department for this year's POS data, we would ask that input be provided by end of month. Give you another week to submit that via email. We have received some emails with some interesting questions that I'd like to go over. Everyone who's joined this meeting had to register, and those who registered were provided a link to the recording of our first meeting. So if that meeting date and time didn't work, didn't fit, didn't meet your schedule, hopefully you've had the opportunity to review the recording and the presentation materials and the raw data. Because again, today's hour is hopefully a focus on hearing from the community. I'll pause there and just open it up to see if there's any immediate input, comments, questions, suggestions to get the ball rolling in today's meeting.
Herman, I see Lisa Hook's hand up from State Council.
Oh, thank you. Lisa, please, if you'd like to unmute, we'd love to hear from you.
Hi, this is Lisa Hooks from the local State Council office. Part of my concern is my ability to participate. So I selected on the global at the bottom English, and yet I was hearing Spanish translation. I then checked Spanish, and now I can hear you in English. So this is a potential problem for people to actively engage if I cannot navigate the system in order to be a participant. I am not Spanish speaking by any means, and I shouldn't have to go through the process of selecting in order to participate in my native language. So that's a problem. That's a concern right off the bat for me about how much do we really want people to engage amongst other things. That's just a start. And I have other comments to make further on about active participation and engagement for the various communities.
Thank you. And I hope that's been resolved at this point where you're able to hear the English communication and participate in your native preferred language. We want everybody to be able to share, and if you have further comments, we'll welcome those at any time.
The problem was not resolved when I just tried it again. So I'll send you all screenshots so you can see. Thank you.
Thanks. And I see Karen Mulvaney's hand up. If you'd like to unmute and contribute, we'd love to hear from you.
Sure, thanks, Herman. First of all, thank you for sending out the data in Excel format, because it enabled me to look at things more easily using Excel than I may not have been otherwise able to do, or at least not without some effort. A couple of things, and I have a number of comments, so I'm just going to let other people talk after I say a few things here. I noticed on the spreadsheet on annual expenditures and authorized services by diagnosis that you didn't provide a total under each breakdown, which you actually do normally do for the rest of the analysis. So I just suggest for next year that, when you provide the PDFs, that you provide the total for example, the total number of individuals' expenditures, per capita authorized services, et cetera, at the bottom of each of the tables that you provide. And of course, I was able to do that myself because you provided it in Excel, but for some folks, it would be easier to see depicted. And on that same table, I wanted to ask if the regional center had any insight into why the utilization of services for those with cerebral palsy drops from over 60% for age 3 to 21 years down to 39.9% for those age 22 and older. And I can think of a couple of things that might be contributing to that myself. And I have to apologize. I didn't realize the prior meeting was going to be the one where you presented information on these issues. But that to me is an indication that the regional center has got a pretty, is recognizing that there's a higher level of need for those individuals once they gain entry into adulthood. And you see that in the authorized POS services number, which is $146,000. But at the same time, we're seeing very low utilization relative to other authorized services by diagnosis. And so I'm just wondering if there's any insight into why those unmet needs are higher for this group, and what might be done to gain some more insight into potential barriers there to help address the need for those services that isn't being met at this point in time.
Thank you, Karen. And I don't know that we're going to be in a position to respond immediately to some of these thoughtful queries, having discovered areas that might require further review, more investigation, but I appreciate that. And I want to make sure I'm understanding what your question is so that we can look into it. When you cite the utilization percentages and correlate that to unmet needs, and unmet needs would seemingly be a result of some type of barrier, and figuring out what that is. Just so I'm connecting the dots, how in your mind are you drawing a connection between the data and unmet needs? Because I think that is a really important concept, is does this data tell us what clients' unmet needs are? And one of the additional points I was going to share is that the state is working on a uniform definition of what equity means. And we talked a little bit about the history, and regional centers have been doing these annual public meetings with the data prescribed by the legislature for 15 years. And in its initial launch, it was thought that what really should be examined is POS dollars, expenditures, and come to realize, at least I think my analysis and realization is that dollars aren't a necessarily great measure. Dollars spent aren't a great measure of equity. And I think back to the visual that we used in previous presentations of equity being people having access to what they need to achieve their goals. And people need different things based on their support needs. And people have different goals that they want to accomplish in life. And those are big variables And on an individual basis, what in my mind would be an example of disparity or inequity would be unmet needs. And I'm not sure that the way the data is examined currently captures that, but I'm hopeful, even confident, that what Alta's doing with our new software system to identify unmet needs at every single individual IPP, that we'll be able to aggregate that and really get a sense of where resource development needs to be focused and what the barriers are to having those tools available to us. But that was long-winded. And Karen, if you had more to add to clarify my understanding of your question, I'd love to.
Sure, I'm happy to. So I'm looking at it from the perspective of authorized services. They're only authorized if the IPP team agrees that they are needed. And so there is already a consensus agreement that there is a need for those services, and hence the team has authorized them. And when you see utilization, that is what percentage of those authorized services were actually delivered. And so when you see low utilization, especially relative to other types of services, potentially, or other services that are delivered for other diagnoses, you naturally wonder what kind of barrier may have existed in trying to actually implement those services for individuals with a cerebral palsy diagnosis, for example. And so I can imagine that one of the potential barriers might be that many of these individuals have to have staff who are familiar with equipment that is used to assist them in mobility or transitioning from one place to another, and may require additional training, or may not have, the physical requirements that may be required of the job to assist those individuals adequately. In any event, the fact that the utilization for adults with cerebral palsy is under 40%, and for other services, it's over 50% and upwards of 74% for other diagnoses. It just creates a question as to what is creating that difference in utilization. Now, sometimes there's a lack of service providers as well. It may not be so much that there is a lack of staff for those types of individuals. It can be that, for whatever reason, the services that they are requesting, there are fewer providers. And so we don't know underneath the authorized services figure what services in particular are most heavily used by individuals with cerebral palsy, and how that changes as you look at other diagnoses. But I can imagine what those might be. In any event, it kind of leapt out at me that that is a low utilization group. The need is obviously quite high because the authorized services are high, meaning everyone in the team recognizes the need for services. And this could be a measure of an unmet need that could maybe benefit from further investigation. And let me just also say, Herman, that I agree with you that sometimes the numbers are not the best representation of unmet needs. I mean, there may be needs that are not captured in these numbers. And it's difficult to say, but what I wouldn't expect to see is that services are authorized for individuals that are not needed. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. So that's where my that's where my mind was going when I looked at those numbers.
Thank you. Yeah. And it's not uncommon that utilization is lower than authorization, but 39%, as you pointed out, even an outlier amongst that sort of statistical norm. And we do now have the capability to delve in and take a closer look at that. So something that we can spend some time exploring and maybe even host some listening sessions, inviting that population to share their sort of qualitative input on barriers they're encountering, as well as our own examination of what are the services that are being authorized that aren't being accessed. So appreciate that. Thank you. Always a keen eye and good insight. Thank you. I see, I think Elijah had his hand up first, and then Kelsey, and then Maureen. Oh, Elijah's hand is down. So.
Oh, I just put it down so that it would drop off. So I just wanted to very quickly note, and thank you, Karen. That was a great point. So yeah, as I'm Elijah Jenkins. I'm the data scientist for Alta California Regional Center. And Herman's right, as we begin to roll out and build out our new client case file management system, we're getting more and more robust data. So as we gather this data, we'll be able to do things like slice by service type and then slice further by utilization and potentially find underserved populations within populations. So that's sort of the end goal, as well as track requests for purchases where a vendor hasn't been identified, which is sort of the gold standard for unmet needs. So that's something we're rolling out as we begin to implement the new DDS IPP in the coming months. So that'll be a big win because it won't require additional reporting lift for our service coordinators, which is always a difficult thing to have them go into multiple systems to report that. So I did just want to note on that front, and this is always the gold standard that we hope for, but that's incredibly hard to achieve, which is causal relationship. So we can see approximate relationships between two statistics, a group and their utilization rate, and then maybe another statistic that they have, age, something of that nature. But determining the cause of why someone would or would not utilize a service is quite difficult. But this is why we have these meetings for feedback, is because this sort of drives me and my team and our research to see if we can get close to an approximation of causal information, which then allows us to create targeted efforts as an agency to address those. So I just wanted to put that out there. We're still building the system. We're still making it more robust every day, and we are building our team to be able to do these complex statistical analysis projects. So I foresee that some of the reporting that you're seeing this year will get even more robust in the years to come. On another note, I looked at they're called the white pages, the release pages for Zoom engineering. And they put a patch in for language 5 days ago, which has crashed their language translation abilities for a lot of meetings. So that's just me saying this was not Herman's fault. This is Zoom's fault. It does look like from that they are in the process of resolving it. So maybe that's something for next year. I'll make sure I check right before we have these public facing meetings so Herman knows what he's walking into. That's all.
Thanks, Elijah. Kelsey, thanks for waiting.
Thank you. I'm going through the data and looking through specifically social recreation numbers, and I'm seeing a lot of stars saying less than 10, especially in the areas for clients who are individuals of color, and he's seen, especially in camping and other services, that it is overwhelming that Alta is providing and utilizing camping services pretty much only for white clients. So is there a concern that social recreation is really only targeting white clients and not actively going into Black, Asian, and Latino, these Latinx communities about social recreation communities? Or is it a concern that we're not going to those vendors where they want to participate in the social recreation of their choice? Or there's more denials in those communities, or less likely that they feel that they can challenge a denial in those communities? Because seeing those stars and seeing the very low numbers makes you wonder, especially with the utilization rates, if they're thinking the only option they have is providing some services, but don't expect any fun from the regional center.
Thank you, Kelsey. And we do have the privilege and benefit of seeing the data that is inclusive of the numbers. The numbers are replaced with stars when they need to be de-identified for purposes of not only being less than 10, but if they're 2 stars, it means that the data could be used to determine another category that would be less than 10. It's a somewhat of a complex math equation, but when we examine the data that we have that's inclusive of the numbers, it's not significantly far off in terms of equitable access. But yeah, to your point, I'd want to point out that a single star means a number in that category is less than 10. 2 stars, that number could be any number. It just happens to be a number that would allow for the data to be solved to identify a number that's less than 10 in a different category. Some complex de-identification methodology used there in compliance with confidentiality for those public records. But we could also look at denials and appeals and frequency of those. But anecdotally, I can't say I'm aware of too many systemic denials that would correlate to demographics of ethnicity or language, but something we can examine and look into.
Just to build off what Herman said too, some of these, I had the same concern, Kelsey, when you saw this and looked at some research papers, and I can put this in the chat. There's a paper by North Carolina University sort of showing the historic and demographic changes and denial of non-white people in general in America to public spaces, especially outdoor spaces. So it's something that I would say is probably more indicative of a national problem, and the way that these activities are talked about in schools, are talked about amongst families, are talked about in different social circles. So for anybody that's interested in seeing that, I'll put that in the chat. That doesn't necessarily go one-to-one to explain why we're seeing this disparity in our system, but it does sort of lean us towards something that could look like an explanation.
Yeah, camping was a definite outlier in terms of which culture accessed that more frequently. So again, perhaps another focus group examination of is that an interest? Is it a goal? If it is, what are the barriers to accessing it on a more frequent basis?
And I think my second question was looking at age 3 to 21, where we're going to have mostly minors and individuals in school. My concern, especially looking through IPPs, going through of just putting down a service, a quick one that you know is going to have a waiting list with the expectation that a client will never get on that list and just moving on without actively working to add more vendors onto the list. So that could add on when it comes to total expenditures, because looking at the numbers at 20%, 30% is extremely small for somebody who wants to participate in a recreational service and should be able to participate. So why is it that you can't find vendors, or do vendors not want to work with Alta because of whatever reason? The big ones I've seen where vendors have told me is that Alta does not pay them or does not pay them timely, so they say goodbye. Because as a business, why would you work with someone who doesn't pay you?
Something we can look into. Thank you. Maureen, you've been waiting with your hand up.
And at the meeting, it was mentioned that it took a median 40 days for an IPP to be translated. And what I was curious is, does Alta send them out to be translated, or are they translated by staff in-house? And also, is there a delay sometimes in setting an IPP meeting because you don't have a translator available?
I'm not aware of any delay in setting the IPP meeting. We have our mandated timelines of holding an IPP within 30 days of any request. Annually, at the time an IPP would be expiring and the need to develop a new one. I'm not aware of any delays in getting those meetings scheduled. The IPPs are sent out for translation. We do use vendored providers to do the written translation for us. Were there other questions you had asked?
I did, but if I could just, one last one related to this. Why does it, in response in the chat in the last meeting, I believe to a question I had, you folks said that there is not a delay in initiating services for the time it takes for the IPP to be translated. I thought IPPs had to be signed, and they signed them in their original, their native language. So we're able to go ahead, Alta's able to go ahead and start providing services even though there isn't a signed IPP?
I believe most families are comfortable signing the English version of the signature page, provided explanation in their native language verbally of what that includes. Now, if a family were to choose to pause on signing, I suppose that could present a delay until the translated version were provided to them to add their signature. But we can look into it. My guess is most clients and families sign at the time of the IPP with the English version that's immediately available with the explanation and translation that's provided verbally.
Okay, thank you. You've got more questions. I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And I see two hands up. Karen and Lisa, I'm not sure which hand went up first on my screen. Karen's.
Lisa can go. I don't know either.
Okay. Lisa, if you'd like to unmute.
Karen, you were actually first. You can go ahead and go.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I think this is a great discussion on social rec, and as I look at the numbers for total expenditures, I see very little difference between different racial and ethnic groups for the age 3 to 21 group. So you see a pretty evenly represented distribution of expenditures and both authorized expenditures and utilization for youth and young adults. And then it all collapses when you get to adults. But you also see extremely low utilization of services in terms of the numbers of individuals, both with respect to the individual racial and ethnic groups, but with respect to the total percentage of individuals, for that age group as a whole. And one thing that I would suggest that you might want to look at is that there just are a lot more recreational services available for younger people, but also transportation may be a factor, because transportation is not included as an authorized service to get to and from like, for example, camp. The family or the individual is expected to privately pay for that. And for some folks, that just may be too much of a burden. And especially for adults who may be, living on their own without family assistance, that could be a barrier to accessing social recreation services for adults. So that would be my thought. And I think it's encouraging that there is very little disparity evident in the numbers for age 3 to 21 years. It only seems to crop up as people age out of that youth category and into adulthood.
Thanks, Karen. And yeah, your point taken that it is somewhat of a small percentage of our overall population, throwing any other variable out other than just, are you using social rec services? We did spend, as I mentioned in the first meeting, $1.5 million on over 2,000 clients at an average of $700, give or take, per client. But we serve 34,000 clients, so that means there are 32,000 clients who aren't incorporating regional center funded social rec services in their plans, despite our efforts to promote its availability and the restoration of our ability to fund that. Lisa.
Thank you. I'm sorry, my hand went down. So I do have a question that has to deal with the translation of the IPP that I heard earlier that I was concerned about. So if I recall, and I'm not sure if I have this correct, in the first meeting, it was talked about that there is 0 request for translation because it's done automatically. And I could be off with this. And I know that Regional Center does, and I'm going to try to pull up my notes. This Alta Regional Center has a little over 34,000 folks. But then when we had the data cited, let me get it, on, yes, slide 16, says approximately 10% is another language. But then on slide 15, it says only 203 IPPs. Now, 10% of 34,000 is way more than 203. What is happening with that 10% who identify something other than English, but yet is not getting an IPP translated? And so how do you know what's their preferred and what they want? Because if they're identifying that English is not the home language, because you got 10% there. Why is the documents, 10% of the documents or the total folks getting an IPP is not in that same language? So I'm just trying to understand the data in that. And then my other question is that if I recall the PowerPoint that was pulled up, one of the higher areas in which you all are utilizing funds or paying for is in respite and SLS. a lot of the folks that we see is saying that they get denied respite. I'd like to see the utilage of and breakdown in ethnicities, children and adults for at least respite and SLS, because that's the primary thing that I get. And that's not just with Alta, that's up and down the state. Black families are consistently saying that respite service is the one service they are constantly denied. And even when they get it, it is not the same as what white families get. So I'd love to see the data on that. And then one other thing that I brought up that again concerns me, because as we're speaking to the community and see why do we not see more folks here at 34,000 folks, and we see only about 50 of us on this call, where's our community who was calling us or coming to agencies and different things complaining? Like, why are you not involved in the process? And so one of the things that is concerning for me is that the first meeting, this is my first time you all attending for your POS. The first meeting was just about giving us the data. I didn't know that this is the process. That's me for failing to read and understanding. The second meeting is to have the discussion. Well, when you're talking about historically underserved communities, to come to multiple meetings at times that don't necessarily go with their work-home life balance, and then feel like I'm not being heard, there's no reason for me to be actively engaged. So I would say if you all would consider next year that the one meeting holds both, because I don't want to come back to a second meeting if I feel like I'm not heard in the first meeting. And if this continuously happens year after year. The first meeting was held between 5 and 7. That was the second day for a new staff that we had, and we had them to adjust and flex their schedule to come in later to stay till after 7 in case the meeting went over. But the meeting was over by 6. So even if I'm that person was like, wait a minute, you had me to alter my life, stay at work later. I'm new to something that didn't even go down. The second part to that is if I'm a working parent and the meeting started at 5 and I'm just getting home at 5:30 and I jumped on, it was over 20 minutes later. I missed all the first half, couldn't get involved. And then you tell me to sign up for the next meeting, which is not during my lunchtime, but 1 to 2. Kind of, again, when you talk about the people we're trying to reach, which is those who are underutilizing services, these times are not the best times for those communities from what I hear. So I want you all to consider when you're looking into planning data, you want people to actively engage and participate. We need to find out what's best for those communities. Historically, in the past, from other regional centers, they did multiple meetings reaching and targeting different communities based on their different needs. So I would encourage you, if you want to hear back from families, to me, starting a meeting at 5 when I'm mom just getting home, trying to get my kids corralled, sitting down, don't have dinner to jump on this, 5 might not be the best time. If I'm a parent who came at 5 and already had to flex my work schedule, and then you want me to flex it again to come to the 1 and 2 to be able to offer this, I may not see a reason to do that. So please just consider that when we're talking about historically underserved communities. I don't think that necessarily the best way to get the most feedback and input. People who want it is going to come regardless too. But if we want to encourage that and we want people to know that we are listening, perhaps next year we can do some things differently. And so that's all that I want to say about that. And again, I thank you all for this opportunity to kind of say this and voice this, that I didn't necessarily have to put this into that email, because that's another barrier, is utilizing that email. Because for me, the people that I represent, which is individuals with disabilities and families up and down the state, no matter what color you are, I want you all to see me and hear me. And that has not come through in an email. And especially if I don't hear you reading that email, to know that you actually got it and is considering it. So that's the other thing. If you all are taking those emails, please address them just like the folks in the chat. Let us know that you hear us and that you're taking that up on, and you'll give us some feedback. So that's all I want to say on behalf of individuals in the state of California. Thank you so much.
And can I piggyback off of that, Lisa, as well? And thank you, Lisa, for bringing that up, because I was actually going to. So I think that you were saying what I was noticing and what multiple parents contacted OCRA about as well. That the meeting did say it was going to be from 5 to 7. So the expectation from multiple times that I've been on these meetings was that the first hour was going to be the presentation and the second hour would be having discussion, because it did say we're going to discuss what was it, the service coordinator unit. So when we say discuss, we assume it would be a discussion as in the participation of the people that we're having. Instead, it was just you talking at the people. And then at 6 o'clock, it was, okay, bye. And you could not get off the Zoom fast enough. We had multiple clients that got babysitters, that got family or friends to watch children, to watch their family members, and contacted them for 2 hours. He's paid somebody for 2 hours thinking that they wanted to participate, only to jump off at 1 hour. And then having 2 different meetings where, okay, just to sit here, where they could have reviewed it and then only come to this one meeting. I think that those instructions were not very clear, and it caused parents to not be able to participate fully. And it caused these individuals to not be able to actually be able to have their voices heard. And I think that that's something for Alta to be able to review and think about for next year.
Thank you, Kelsey and Lisa. And I see Karen, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think these are all great suggestions on improving the reach to all of the clients that are served by Alta and their families. And I think we've had these discussions before in prior years that, you know, folks who are working need to be able to have usually an early evening meeting. And for other folks, perhaps a meeting during the day is best. And so having the full agenda, both presentation and Q&A and input delivery for both meetings would be ideal. But I also want to say that I clearly remember going to these meetings in prior years, and I was the only family member there. So things have come a long, long way. And I do appreciate what Alta has done to improve its outreach to the community. It may also be that families don't necessarily understand that this is an important opportunity for them to understand how services to their family can be affected by their input in these meetings. And they might, you know, POS is something that we all understand, but, you know, lots of families, it's Greek. So we might want to even rename the meeting so that people have a better understanding that this is their opportunity to share on what they might be experiencing in terms of barriers to accessing services, and so on and so forth. Thanks.
Thank you, Karen. And I do want to go back to an important point that Lisa included in her comment and feedback, the importance of being heard and closing the loop and responding to emails and chat and different platforms that that information can be shared. I do want to share that our executive director is with us today. She's at a location where she's prohibited from having her microphone and sound turned on due to background disruption noise. But everything that's being shared, everything that's being suggested, questions that are being asked, emails that are being sent, are all being taken into consideration, examined, reviewed, and where opportunity exists to circle back to communicate to individuals, that will be done. And our report of the summary of this meeting, which I do believe has provided us with some valuable input and feedback, will be shared with the department, posted on our website for public view. Karen, I see your hand up. I'm not sure if that was raised again or from the last time. And you're on mute, Karen, if you're speaking. Sorry.
Sorry about that. Yeah, just a very broad general comment. I think it would be, and this is a comment really more for DDS, I think it would be really helpful if DDS would compile all the POS data for all of the regional centers, so that we can see what the statewide averages are. I mean, in some, for example, Alta achieved, perfection in its scores of IPP language translation in terms of meeting the threshold metric. It'd be really interesting to find out how other regional centers are faring with respect to that metric, in part because one of the performance measures for regional centers statewide is language translation. And if everybody's already achieving 100% translation with respect to their metrics, then we need to move on to something else. So it's, it helps all of us who are regional center clients and family members to understand how Alta is performing relative to statewide numbers if DDS would actually publish POS data for the state as a whole. Thanks.
Thank you for that. I see Peter Mendoza is in the meeting and has his hand up. Peter.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to touch on, it is important that the translation of the IPP happens timely, because I also receive regional center services. So from a personal point of view, it doesn't happen too often, but sometimes there's mistakes, and you don't want a person who you're serving or a family member to, I read all my paperwork. A lot of us do. And if it's not in our preferred language, there's a delay in service, and you really want to avoid that, because by not having it translated more timely, you're you're making a programmatic barrier. The other issue I wanted to mention is more documents in plain language. We want the people we serve to really benefit from regional centers meetings, including conversations about POS. So more plain language material would be good. And also reaching out to other self-advocate groups of folks who receive services and family members too. I may have missed it, so please let me know. I didn't see very much in plain language. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. We have reached 2 o'clock. I'm in no rush to get out. I do want to drop in. I think I have copied again the email contact for anyone that would like to follow up with written comments, suggestions, feedback, input. I'd also like to just pose the question, if folks in the meeting would humor me and drop in chat what their definition of equity is, since the state is working on a uniform definition, and I'm sure they'll have stakeholder groups and listening sessions and input from community, but taking advantage of the people here. And the question, equity or equality, I would love the definition of equity. I think that's what we're trying to achieve. We aren't trying to achieve equality. Equality is everybody getting the same thing. We know everybody getting the same thing doesn't meet everybody's needs. So I think our goal should be equity. And with that being the importance and the focus, how would you define that? And how would you define that in terms of regional center service and access? And I'll pause and just let people think, ponder on that. If you don't want to put it in chat for public review, feel free to send it to the POS equity email. But I appreciate all the specific feedback, which gives Alta opportunities to do better in the future. and the questions that allow us to examine areas where we don't have all the answers. I think this was a valuable, informative meeting. I thank you all for your time.
Just Peter, would it be okay if I voiced it on my, and I don't know if this is the exact definition, but this is sort of my thoughts on equity as it relates to services. I'm not able to type in the chat today.
Definitely, if you're comfortable sharing, I'd love to hear you voice your definition.
To me, equity is having, the Lanterman Act, that's the bedrock of our system, really talks about people with intellectual and developmental disabilities having the services and supports they need to exercise independent self-determination, full inclusion, for example, and to be able to participate in, I'm going to use a little broader term, community life for society, just like those without disabilities. So for me, equity is getting to yes more often when someone needs support, service is done timely, approvals happening sooner, so that people can get what they need as fast as they can. And I understand the need to have checks and balances. I'm not saying that, but when people have a goal or activities they want to do in their life, work, live, and recreate as independently as possible in the less restrictive environment to live the life that they choose, equity is maybe not having us go through all hoops that other folks without disabilities who want the same thing have in their life. Again, it's not a strict definition. My dictionary is not working very well in my brain, but that's what I envision.
Thank you, Peter. I like your definition better than anything a dictionary might tell us, so I appreciate that. All right, well, hopefully everyone's had time to respond in chat who wanted, or copy and paste the email link where they can provide follow-up feedback. And if there's any other verbal comment input, happy to recognize people, give them the floor. But if not, I thank you for your time. And those who had specific inquiries, we'll do our best to reach out to you individually, and everyone can look to review the Regional Center's summary report that'll be posted on our website and shared with the department. Thank you.